The wind was sharp that night, the kind that stung the skin and cut straight through threadbare coats. Out on the open plains of the old American countryside, winter had a way of testing every bone, every breath, every bit of a body's strength. The moon hung pale above the frosted fields, casting a faint light across a lonely farmhouse that stood against the cold. The barn beside it was quiet, except for the muffled low of a cow inside. Steam rising from the animal's breath, as if the earth itself was trying to fight back against the chill. From the dirt road, 3 figures slowly came forward, their shapes hunched and small, moving as if every step might be their last. The eldest was a boy, maybe no more than 12, his hands red and raw from the cold. Beside him walked his little sister, wrapped in a thin shawl that was no match for the biting air. Behind them came their mother, a woman whose face was worn by worry and hardship, yet whose eyes still carried a flicker of strength. She walked slower than the children, her body trembling with every step, her shoes worn to the soles. The snow crunched under them, and each sound seemed louder in the silence of the night. The boy kept glancing back at his mother, fear in his eyes though he tried to look braver for his sister's sake. They had been on the road since morning, wandering from one farmhouse to another, looking for a place where the children might find warmth, where their mother's frozen feet might rest. The land was wide and unforgiving, and kindness was not always certain. People held tight to what little they had, especially in a season like this, when barns had to be guarded and cellars locked, when every family was trying to make it through. Yet hunger and cold make beggars out of the proudest souls, and the boy had no choice left but to ask for mercy. As they neared the farmhouse, a faint glow of firelight flickered through the window, and the boy's heart raced. Warmth meant hope, if only for one night. He felt his sister shiver and gripped her hand tighter, leading her forward while his mother lagged behind. When they reached the barnyard gate, the boy hesitated, his breath puffing in the air. The house looked close, yet far away, like a promise that might not be kept. He swallowed hard, gathering courage that felt too big for his small body, and pushed the gate open. The creak of the wood echoed, and for a moment he feared someone inside might chase them off before he even spoke. The door to the house opened, and a tall figure stepped out, lantern in hand. The man was broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy coat, his hat pulled low against the wind. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the 3 shadows standing by his gate. Silence stretched between them, heavy and uneasy, until the boy stepped forward, his voice trembling yet steady enough to be heard. "Sir, if we milk your cow, would you let Mama sleep inside? Her feet are frozen." The words carried across the yard, carried with them the raw truth of desperation and the kind of honesty only a child could speak. The lantern light flickered on the man's face, revealing lines etched deep into his skin, a life of labor and worry not unlike their own. He didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted to the woman behind the children, her figure hunched, her breath clouding the night air. Then he looked at the little girl, shivering so hard her teeth nearly chattered. The boy's question hung there more than a request. It was a plea for survival, an unspoken promise that they would work, they would serve, they would do anything, so long as his mother could rest her weary bones inside, so long as his sister's tiny hands could thaw near a fire. But mercy was not a simple thing in those days. To take strangers in meant one more mouth to feed, one more burden to shoulder when supplies were already thin. Still, the man stood in silence, his lantern casting long shadows on the snow. The boy's heart pounded, his words repeating in his head, wondering if he had said too much or too little. His mother stayed quiet, as if her pride still held her tongue. But her eyes told a story of miles walked and nights endured in the bitter cold. The girl pressed against her brother's side, her small voice whispering just loud enough for him to hear. "Do you think he'll let us stay?" The boy didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. The man finally shifted, stepping off his porch, his boots crunching in the snow. He lowered the lantern, the glow now spilling across their faces, revealing the raw truth of their condition. His eyes lingered on the boy's cracked hands, the girl's thin shawl, the mother's trembling legs. For a moment something softened in him, though his voice was firm when he finally spoke. "You're a long way from where you ought to be. What's brought you here this time of night?" The boy opened his mouth, but no words came at first. All the miles, all the hunger, all the nights they had gone without, it pressed heavy on his chest. He managed a broken reply. "We've been walking, looking for work, for a place to stop. Just for tonight, sir. Mama can't walk no more." His throat tightened, but he forced the words out, the way a boy has to, when he's the only one left to speak for his family. The man's face was unreadable in the lantern glow. He glanced back at his house, where the fire still burned behind the frosted window, then looked again at the family before him. His silence stretched long, longer than the boy could bear. He felt his sister clutch his arm tighter, and he feared the answer would be no. His mother's eyes dropped to the ground, already bracing for the disappointment, for the walk that might finish what little strength she had left. And yet the cow in the barn gave another low, steady sound, as if reminding them all of its presence. The boy's words echoed once more in the night air. If they milked the cow, if they worked, if they proved themselves, could they earn a place inside? It was not just a child's bargain. It was a test of how much mercy a stranger's heart could hold. The man finally drew a slow breath, lifting his lantern higher as if to see them clearer. The glow fell on the children's faces, on the woman's weary frame, and he hesitated, torn between caution and compassion. The boy waited, every muscle in his body tense, the cold pressing harder now, as if time itself was running out. The night seemed to pause right there on the edge of decision. It's the boy's words, the man's silence. The frozen earth beneath their feet, it all hung in a fragile balance, ready to tip one way or the other. Whether the door would open or close, whether warmth or cold would win, no one yet knew. The lantern flickered in the wind, and the man's eyes met the boy's, leaving the answer unspoken as the night deepened around them. The boy stood frozen in the lantern's glow, the cold air burning in his lungs as the silence stretched longer than he could endure. The man's eyes locked on his, and though no words were spoken, the weight of the moment pressed down like a heavy stone. Behind him, his sister clung to his arm, her small frame trembling. Their mother's breath came shallow, her body swaying slightly as though each heartbeat cost her more than she had to give. The boy felt the urge to shout, to beg, but something in the man's stern gaze held him still. It was a stare that measured, that judged, that seemed to ask questions the boy didn't know how to answer. The lantern light flickered as the wind caught it, shadows stretching across the snow. The man finally stepped closer, his boots crunching slow and steady, the sound echoing in the boy's ears. He stopped just short of them, his face unreadable, yet his eyes restless as if torn between two choices. "You've been walking long?" His voice was deep, roughened by years of weather and work. The boy swallowed hard and nodded. "Since sunup, sir?" He dared to glance at his mother, who leaned heavily on the fence post, her eyes lowered. Her lips tight against words she refused to say. The man's gaze followed his, and for a brief moment the stern look faltered, replaced by something else, something the boy thought might be pity, though it was gone as quickly as it appeared. The man turned his lantern toward the barn, and the cow inside gave another low call, as if sensing the stillness of the humans outside. "You think you know how to handle her?" the man asked, his tone clipped, his eyes narrowing back at the boy. "Yes, sir," the boy answered quickly. Though in truth his hands had touched only one cow before, years ago, on a small patch of land they had once called home, he said it anyway because hope was fragile and he could not risk it slipping away. The man's gaze lingered, searching for lies, but the boy held his eyes steady, willing himself not to look away.
Ow.
The man drew in a slow breath, then shifted, lowering the lantern toward the frozen earth. "We'll see." He stepped back, nodding slightly toward the barn. The boy's heart kicked in his chest. He felt his sister tug at his arm, her eyes wide, her lips parting as if she wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Their mother remained silent, her figure swaying like a tree bent in the wind. The boy swallowed and tightened his grip on his sister's hand. They moved toward the barn, the man's lantern throwing light before them, guiding the way, yet keeping its answers hidden. Inside, the barn smelled of hay and earth, the warmth of the animal a sharp contrast to the bitter night. The cow stood calm, her large eyes glinting in the dim light, steam rising from her as she shifted her weight. The boy approached slowly, his legs trembling, not from fear of the animal but from the weight of what this moment meant. His hands ached from the cold, cracked and stiff, but he forced himself forward, placing his palm against the cow's side. The warmth seeped into him, and for the first time in days, he felt something other than the bite of winter. The man stood in the doorway, lantern raised, watching every move. His silence was heavier than words. The boy bent to the stool, his hands clumsy but determined as he tried to remember the rhythm he had once seen. The pull and press, the steady motion that would bring milk. His fingers fumbled, and for a moment nothing came. He felt the weight of the man's stare, the seconds stretching thin, the chance of failure pressing hard. His sister shifted nervously near the stall, her eyes darting from him to the man and back again. Then a stream of warm milk hit the pail, faint at first, then steady.
Yes.
Relief rushed through him, and he kept working, his hands finding a rhythm, his body moving despite the cold that stiffened every joint. The sound of milk striking the tin echoed through the barn, small but steady, like the sound of hope being measured out one drop at a time. The man's expression remained hard, though something flickered in his eyes. He stepped closer, lowering the lantern to see. The boy kept working, refusing to look up, refusing to show weakness. His sister's breathing slowed as she watched, her little hands clasped together as if in prayer. Their mother leaned against the stall, her body trembling, her lips moving silently as if she too prayed for the milk to keep flowing. When the pail was nearly half full, the man finally spoke, his voice low. "That'll do." He reached for the pail himself, weighing it in his hand, his face still unreadable. He looked at the boy, then at the woman, then back again. For a moment, the silence grew sharp, like a blade about to cut. The boy's heart hammered. He wanted to ask again, wanted to plead the words he had already spoken, but his throat locked tight. His sister's eyes brimmed with tears she refused to let fall. Their mother stood still, her face pale, her body nearly at its limit. The man set the pail down and lifted the lantern higher. His eyes narrowed as he studied them once more, as though trying to see beneath the dirt, beneath the hunger, beneath the desperation that clung to them. He opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again, the words caught in some inner struggle. The wind howled outside, rattling the barn walls as if the night itself pressed in on all of them. The boy's legs shook from exhaustion, his hands raw, yet he stood firm, waiting for the judgment that felt as heavy as the storm around them.
Ow.
The man's silence seemed endless, and the boy wondered if mercy could truly live in the heart of a stranger, or if they would be sent back into the night, to walk until the cold claimed them. The lantern flame wavered, casting long shadows across the hay, bending and stretching their faces into shapes that looked almost ghostly. The cow shifted, her breath clouding the air, a reminder of warmth just within reach yet not promised. The boy felt his sister's small hand grip tighter, her pulse racing against his palm. Mother closed her eyes, whispering words only the wind seemed to hear. The man's jaw clenched, his hand tightening around the lantern's handle. For a heartbeat, it looked as if he might speak, as if he might open the door to something more than cold. But he didn't. Not yet. He only stood there, torn, the lantern casting firelight across his stern face, leaving the answer suspended in the bitter air. The boy's chest ached, his hope thinning with every second. He thought of the miles behind them, the endless road, the frozen fields stretching into darkness. He thought of nights when hunger gnawed at their bellies, when his mother forced a smile through tears, when his sister curled against him shivering in the dark. He thought of how close they were to breaking, how much hung on this single choice. The man's eyes burned with some battle he would not reveal, his silence colder than the winter itself. The boy stood trembling, his mother swaying, his sister clutching tighter, and the night waited for a decision that refused to come. And still, the door to the house remained shut, the warmth of the fire trapped inside unreachable. As the storm pressed down harder on the barn and on the 3 souls who lingered on the edge of mercy, the boy stood in the barn, his hands still stinging from the cold, his heart pounding as if it might crack his ribs. The man hadn't said yes, and he hadn't said no. He only stood there, his lantern throwing long shadows that made the barn feel more like a place of judgment than refuge. The boy knew the silence meant something, though he couldn't read what his sister pressed against him, her face half hidden in his coat, while their mother leaned weakly against the wooden stall, her lips pale and her eyes distant. The barn was warmer than the open fields, but it wasn't enough, not for her. The man set the lantern on a beam and crouched near the milk pail. He stirred the warm liquid with a calloused hand, the steam rising faint in the dim light. "You did fair," he said at last, though his tone was neither praise nor comfort. "Fair enough." His eyes lifted, studying the boy with a sharpness that cut deeper than the cold outside. "But fair isn't always enough to earn a fire." The boy stiffened. He wanted to argue, to say they weren't asking for a fire so much as a corner, a chance, but the words tangled in his chest. He was old enough to understand that men like this didn't answer to pleading. They answered to proof. And what proof could a boy with blistered hands and a frozen sister give? The cow shifted again, her hoof scraping against the hay, and the sound seemed to echo louder than it should have. The man stood, his shoulders tall and stiff, and for a moment his face softened as his gaze landed on the mother. She swayed where she stood, her body trembling, her eyes closing, as if just staying upright was too much. The man turned away quickly, his jaw tightening. "It's a hard winter," he muttered, almost to himself. "Harder than most remember?" Boy caught that faint crack in his voice and held on to it like a lifeline. Maybe, just maybe, the man wasn't as unshakable as he looked. But hope was a dangerous thing. From outside, the wind roared louder, slamming against the barn doors with a force that rattled the wood. Snow swept through the cracks, dusting the hay in a thin, cold veil. The little girl whimpered, burying her face deeper into her brother's arm. The boy rubbed her shoulder, whispering softly, "It'll be all right," though he wasn't sure it would. He said it because he had to, because words were all he had to shield her from despair. The man turned toward the sound of the storm and stood in silence. His lantern flame flickered and stretched as the wind pushed at the barn walls. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "There are men out on these roads tonight. Men who'd take more than a cow if they found one standing easy."
"Oh, yeah."
He looked back at the boy then, his eyes narrowing. "You think you're the only ones who've come knocking this winter?" The boy's chest tightened. He hadn't thought about others, about families scattered across the frozen land, all searching for food, for fire, for mercy. The thought of them turned the man's barn into something larger, a place not only of warmth, but of risk. If the man opened his door to one family, what would stop the rest from coming? The boy saw it now, the burden of the decision, the danger behind every choice. Still, the boy could not let the silence win. He straightened his back, though his knees shook. "We'll work, sir," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. "Not just tonight. Whatever needs doing. Mama used to mend. I can help with wood or water. My sister, she can carry light things." The man studied him, his eyes unreadable, though they lingered on the boy's cracked hands. For a long while he said nothing, the barn filled only with the sound of the cow shifting in her stall and the wind pressing harder against the walls. Then the man lifted the lantern again and said, "Come on." The boy's heart leaped, but fear kept him quiet. He followed, holding tight to his sister's hand as their mother trailed behind. Her steps slow, each one like it might be her last. The man led them across the barnyard, the lantern casting weak light against the driving snow. The house loomed closer, its windows glowing faintly with firelight, promising a warmth they could barely imagine. At the door, the man paused. He looked back at them, his jaw set. "You come in quiet. You don't touch nothing that ain't yours. You understand?" "Yes, sir," the boy whispered quickly, his breath clouding in the frigid air. His sister nodded, her face pale and pinched, her small hand trembling in his. Their mother said nothing, only clutched the frame of the door as the man opened it. The warmth hit them immediately, a wave that nearly brought the boy to tears. The smell of wood smoke, faint and sharp, filled his lungs. And for the first time that night he felt the promise of safety. But as they stepped inside, the boy realized warmth came with its own shadows. The room was plain, but strong. The walls lined with rough wood, a fire burning steady in the hearth. A long table sat at the center, its surface clean, though no food was laid out. Against the far wall, a rifle rested on a rack, polished and ready. The boy's eyes lingered on it. A chill slid through him that had nothing to do with the cold. The man set the lantern down and turned to face them. His eyes swept over the children, then their mother. And for the first time, his expression cracked into something almost like unease. "Stay near the fire," he said. I'll fetch water." He left them then, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, his shadow stretching as he disappeared into another room. The boy led his sister toward the hearth, easing her down onto the rug. Her small hands stretched toward the flames, trembling as they thawed. Their mother sank into the nearest chair, her body sagging like a rope cut loose. The boy crouched beside her, whispering softly, "We're inside now. Just rest, Mama. Just rest." Her eyes opened, faint but tender, and she brushed a shaking hand against his cheek. Yet even in that moment of relief, the boy's gaze kept drifting toward the doorway where the man had gone. The house was warm, yes, but it was not theirs. It was a place of rules, of hidden dangers, and though the man had let them in, his silence still hung heavy. When he returned, he carried a basin of water, setting it near the fire. "For her feet?" he said curtly, nodding at the mother. His eyes flicked toward the boy. "Help her." The boy knelt quickly, easing his mother's shoes off. Her feet were raw, cracked, and swollen, the sight of them pulling at something deep inside him. He dipped the cloth into the basin and pressed it gently against her skin, the warmth drawing faint gasps from her lips. His sister leaned close, her small face filled with worry. The man stood in the corner, arms folded, his gaze never leaving them. The boy could feel the weight of it, like a test not yet finished. Each movement, each word, seemed to matter more than he could understand. The fire crackled. The storm roared outside, and still the man did not speak. The boy wanted to ask why, wanted to demand what he planned for them, but he held his tongue. Instead, he worked silently, his hands careful, his heart pounding. The man finally shifted, his voice low. "You'll earn your keep. Every day. If I find you idle, you're gone. You hear me?" The boy nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." The man's gaze moved to the mother, then back to him. "And if anyone comes looking, you'll never say you're here. You keep your mouth shut, always." The boy blinked, confusion flickering in his chest. Looking? Who'd be looking? The man didn't answer. He only stared, his eyes darker now, his jaw set. The boy felt the question claw at him, but fear kept him silent. The room was warm, the fire strong. Yet the boy felt the cold of the outside still clinging, not to his skin, but to his heart. They had stepped inside, but the danger hadn't stayed behind in the snow. It had followed them in, wrapped in shadows and secrets that lived in this house. In the man's silence, in the storm that refused to end, and as the night deepened, the boy understood that survival here would demand more than warmth, more than work. It would demand answers he did not yet have, and strength he wasn't sure he possessed. The fire burned low in the hearth, low shadows stretching long and thin across the wooden walls. The boy sat close, his sister curled against him, their mother dozing in the chair beside them. The warmth had begun to loosen the ache in their bones, but it could not soften the unease that pressed over the room like a heavy blanket. The man moved about the cabin with a restless air, his boots striking the floor in a rhythm that betrayed both thought and tension. Every time his eyes fell on them, the boy felt a shiver crawl down his spine, as if their very presence unsettled something deep within the man. Outside, the storm showed no sign of easing. The wind rattled the shutters and snow piled against the door, muffling the world beyond. It was a night that made travelers vanish, a night where silence swallowed cries for help. The boy knew this, and yet he could not shake the feeling that danger was not just outside in the storm, but inside these walls as well. The man finally broke the silence, his voice rough. "You'll need to rise early. The woodpile's near gone. If you want to stay here, you'll earn it." The boy nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." His voice came out hoarse, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile ground they stood on. The man's gaze lingered on him before sliding toward their mother. She stirred faintly, her eyes half open, and the man's jaw tightened. He turned away, pacing to the table, his hand brushing the rifle that rested on the rack. He didn't lift it, didn't even pause. But the motion was enough to send a chill through the boy. The girl whispered softly, almost too quiet to hear, "Why does he keep looking at us like that?" Her brother hushed her, stroking her hair. Though he had no answer, as the night dragged on, the boy fought to keep his eyes open. Each crack of the fire sounded like a gunshot in the stillness, each gust of wind like a cry from far off in the dark. He leaned against the wall, exhaustion pulling at him until the man's voice cut through the haze. "Don't sleep too deep. Not tonight." The boy lifted his head, startled. "Why not, sir?" The man's eyes were hard, the lantern light catching the edge of his face. "Because trouble don't wait for daylight." The words settled heavy in the boy's chest. He lay awake, listening to the storm, his thoughts racing. Trouble. The man had said it before, hinting at others on the road. Men who would take more than a cow if given the chance. Who were they? Bandits? Neighbors? The boy could not tell. But the way the man's hand hovered near the rifle told him the threat was real. Hours passed, each one slower than the last. The fire dimmed to embers, and the boy stirred it with care, trying not to wake his mother who had slipped into uneasy sleep. His sister's breathing was steady against him, but her small fingers clung tight to his sleeve even in dreams. Then a sound broke through the storm. A sharp thud against the door. The boy froze, his breath caught in his throat. Another thud followed, heavier this time, as if something or someone pressed against the wood. The man was across the room in an instant, his hand gripping the rifle. His eyes darted to the family, his voice low and urgent. "Stay quiet." The boy wrapped his arms around his sister, pulling her close, his heart racing. His mother stirred, her eyes opening slowly. Confusion flickering across her face as she realized the man stood armed by the door. The knock came again, louder, deliberate. Then a voice called through the storm, muffled but clear enough. "Open up." The man's grip on the rifle tightened. He didn't answer. He stood still, listening, his jaw clenched. The boy held his breath, straining to hear. Another voice followed, this one sharper. "We know you're in there. Best open the door before we take it down." The mother's face went pale, her lips pressing together to hold back a cry. The girl buried her face in her brother's chest, trembling. The boy's pulse pounded in his ears. He looked at the man, waiting for some sign of what to do. But the man's eyes stayed fixed on the door. His body rigid, the storm howled, snow slamming against the walls. Yet the voices outside were stronger still. Another pound shook the wood, the door groaning on its hinges. The man finally spoke, his voice low and fierce. Not a sound. Not one. The boy nodded, clamping a hand gently over his sister's mouth, though she made no noise. His mother clutched the arms of the chair, her knuckles white. The men outside shouted again, words lost to the storm. But the tone was clear. Anger, demand, threat. The boy's stomach twisted. He thought of the milk in the pail, of the fire warming their skin, of the fragile hope they had carried into this house. All of it now hung by a thread, ready to snap. The man stepped closer to the door, his rifle raised, his shadow stretching tall against the wall. The boy could see his chest rise and fall in steady rhythm. A man bracing himself for what might come crashing through the wood. For a heartbeat, all was still. Then the door shook hard, nearly buckling under the weight of the blow. The girl whimpered, and the boy pressed his lips to her hair, whispering a shaky, "She." "It's all right," though his voice betrayed the lie. His mother's eyes locked on his, wide and fearful, as if she knew more than she said. The man at the door shifted, his head tilting as if he were measuring time itself. He looked back at the family, his eyes sharp and filled with something unspoken. Then he faced the door again, his finger tightening on the trigger. The storm raged. The voices grew louder, and the pounding on the door turned to a steady, merciless rhythm. The boy's heart thundered, each beat counting down to something he could not yet see. The cabin seemed smaller, the walls closing in. Every shadow alive with threat. The boy clutched his sister tighter, his gaze darting between his mother's pale face and the man with the rifle. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew it would change everything. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm building within these walls. A storm of secrets, strangers, and survival. The pounding grew harder. The voices sharper, and the man's voice, low and steady, cut through it all. "They're not here for me alone." The boy's breath caught, the words sinking deep. He looked at the man, then at his mother, who had gone rigid in the chair, her eyes wide with something more than fear. She knew. She understood. And the boy realized in that moment there was more to their wandering, more to their frozen journey than he had ever been told. The door rattled again, and the boy's chest tightened until he could barely breathe. The storm roared, the fire crackled, and the cabin shook with the weight of the blows. The man raised his rifle higher, the shadows swallowing his face, and the boy knew they stood on the edge of something far greater than a single night's shelter. The next strike at the door splintered the wood, sending shards flying across the floor. The girl cried out before she could stop herself, her voice piercing the heavy silence. The boy clamped his hand over her mouth again, his own eyes wide with terror. The men outside shouted, their voices triumphant, certain now of weakness within. The man by the door drew in a sharp breath, his muscles tensed, his jaw set for battle. The boy's world narrowed to the fire, the rifle, the pounding door, and the secrets buried in his mother's eyes. The moment stretched thin, ready to snap, and every breath, every sound, every flicker of the storm built toward the breaking point, and then the wood cracked once more, the door bending inward under the force. The lantern light trembling, shadows leaping high across the walls. The man's voice, steady and sharp, cut through it all. "Stay down." The boy pulled his sister close, shielding her with his body. His mother's hands gripping the chair as if it might hold, or steady against the storm about to crash through. The door shook again. The rifle lifted, and the air grew thick with the weight of the moment. The boy's heart hammered so loud he thought it might give them away. The storm outside screamed, the fire hissed, and in that breathless second everything hung in the balance. Waiting for the world to break open, the rifle cracked as the door burst inward, the sound deafening inside the cabin. Splinters flew across the floor, the firelight flaring as the storm howled through the gap. The boy dropped flat with his sister clutched against him, his mother's cry sharp and broken behind them. Shadows spilled in from the porch, heavy boots stomping snow onto the wood. The men outside had broken through, the room filled with their presence before the boy could draw another breath. The first figure stumbled back as the shot tore into the frame near his shoulder. He swore, ducking low, another man pushing in behind him with a crowbar gripped tight. The lantern swayed from its hook, casting wild shapes against the walls. The boy pressed his sister's face into his chest, whispering frantic comforts he didn't believe himself. The man of the house stood firm at the broken door, his rifle raised again. His voice cut the chaos sharp as steel. "You take one more step, you won't take another." For a moment, the intruders hesitated. The storm roared behind them, snow blowing through the shattered frame. Yet the firelight inside revealed the lines of their faces, cold and hollow with hunger, their eyes sharp with desperation. They weren't strangers to the boy's family. They wore the same ragged coats, the same wariness of winter. They were men who had chosen to take instead of ask. The leader spat into the snow at his feet, his breath steaming in the lantern glow. "We know you've got food stashed. No man keeps a cow through this winter without more in the cellar."
Ounce!
The householder's jaw clenched. "That cow's the only thing between my family and hunger. You think I'll hand her over to thieves?" The standoff stretched, the air taut with danger. The boy lifted his head just enough to see, his heart pounding. He thought of the miles they had walked, of his mother's frozen feet, of the milk he had drawn from the cow. He knew what was at stake, not just for the man with the rifle, but for them too. If the intruders stripped the house bare, there would be nothing left for anyone. The men shifted uneasily, the storm pressing at their backs. The leader sneered, but behind the hardness there was something else, a hesitation born of knowing the risk. They were desperate, but so was the man standing before them. Another voice rose from the shadows. This one smaller, thinner. The boy's mother had pushed herself to her feet, bracing against the chair, her voice trembling but clear. "There's nothing here for you. If you take this place, you'll leave children to starve." Her words hung in the storm's roar, not shouted, but strong enough to carry. The men glanced at one another, their shoulders stiff. Hunger and pride battled with the faint flicker of shame her words had struck. The man with the rifle did not lower his weapon, but his voice dropped, steady and grim. You've got a choice. Walk back into the storm and keep your honor, or stay and meet the ground before morning. The leader cursed again, but his men shifted. One tugged at his sleeve, muttering low. The storm outside screamed louder, a reminder of how far they had come and how far they'd have to go back. At last, with a growl deep in his throat, the leader spat once more and backed toward the snow. This ain't the end, he hissed. Then he was gone, swallowed by the blizzard, his men trailing behind, their figures vanishing into the white. The door hung crooked, snow swirling into the cabin, the fire sputtering as the cold rushed in. The man lowered his rifle, his shoulders sagging under the weight of what had just passed. He shut the door as best he could, jamming the broken frame with a heavy beam. Then turned to face the family huddled by the hearth. The boy's heart still pounded, his sister clinging to him, their mother slumped against the chair, her strength nearly spent. The man's eyes swept over them, and for the first time since they had arrived, his face softened. "You've seen now why I keep the rifle close," he said quietly. "This winter don't forgive the weak, and mercy's a dangerous thing." The boy swallowed hard, still clutching his sister. "But you showed mercy to us." The man paused, his gaze heavy, then nodded once. "Maybe I did. Maybe I had to." He glanced at the mother, who met his eyes with a quiet understanding. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared hardship, of the thin line between survival and ruin. The storm raged on through the night, but no more knocks came at the door. The children dozed fitfully by the fire, their mother's hand resting lightly on their shoulders. The man kept watch, rifle across his knees, his eyes never leaving the shadows beyond the flames. When morning came, the storm had eased, leaving the world buried in silence and snow. The land stretched white and endless, broken only by the dark lines of trees and the faint smoke rising from the cabin chimney. The man opened the door to the cold, his breath steaming as he looked out. There were no tracks left from the men who had come in the night, no sign of their passing but the broken frame and the memory of voices carried on the wind. The boy rose stiffly, helping his sister to her feet. Their mother tried to stand but swayed, and the boy steadied her gently. The man watched, then spoke low. "You've got strength, boy. More than most your age. That strength will keep you alive if you use it wisely." The boy met his eyes, unsure how to answer. He only nodded, the weight of the night still pressing on him. The man set his rifle back on the rack and turned toward the hearth. "You'll stay till she's well enough to walk. Work will be waiting for you each day. After that, the road's yours again." It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was more than the boy had hoped for. He felt his chest ease just slightly as he looked at his mother and sister. They had a place for now, a fire to keep them warm, a chance to heal days past. Each one heavy with work, but steadier than the road behind them. The boy chopped wood until his arms ached, fetched water from the frozen creek, and tended the cow with a care born of gratitude. His sister helped where she could, carrying kindling, sweeping the floor, humming softly, as if to fill the silence. Their mother mended torn cloth with trembling fingers, her strength slow to return, but her spirit unbroken. The man spoke little, but his watchful eyes softened as the days went by. He never explained who the men were, or why they had come, but the boy understood enough. Winter had turned neighbor against neighbor. Hunger, twisting men into something hard and dangerous. One evening, as the fire glowed low and the cabin grew quiet, the boy asked the question that had lingered since that night. "Sir, why did you let us in? You could have sent us away." The man stared into the flames, his face unreadable. "Because I saw myself in you. A boy once stood at my door, asking near the same thing. I turned him away. He never came back." I reckon that memory don't leave a man. The words settled deep, carrying both sorrow and a kind of quiet resolve. The boy said nothing more, only held his sister closer, feeling the fire's warmth on his face. When the thaw finally came and the roads cleared, the time to leave drew near. Their mother had healed enough to walk, though slowly, and the boy felt the pull of the road once more. Yet as they packed the few things they had, The man handed the boy a small pouch of dried food and placed his rough hand on his shoulder. You keep your family close. That's the only thing worth carrying through this world. The boy nodded, his throat too tight for words. His sister smiled faintly, her hand slipping into his, her small fingers warm at last. Their mother's eyes glistened with gratitude. She did not try to speak. They stepped out into the morning light. The snow melting in patches, the land stretching wide and uncertain before them. The cabin behind them stood strong against the sky, smoke curling from its chimney, a reminder of mercy in a winter that had little to spare as they walked on. The boy glanced back once, the image of the house burning itself into his memory. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be more storms, more hunger, more nights of fear, but there would also be firelight, warmth, and the knowledge that kindness, though rare, could still be found. The wind carried their breath into the air, the sound of their steps soft against the thawing earth. The boy tightened his grip on his sister's hand and steadied his mother's arm. They moved forward together, carrying not just the weight of their journey, but the lesson of the night. They had nearly lost everything, and though the world remained cold and unforgiving, something inside him had changed. He had seen that even in the harshest winters, mercy could survive, and that, he knew, was enough to keep walking.